At our anniversary dinner, I raised my glass to announce my promotion, and my husband said, "Which executive did you sleep with?" The entire restaurant table went silent, including my parents, his parents, my sister, and his brother, who'd all come to celebrate our 10th anniversary. "What did you just say?" I set down my champagne glass and stared at my husband, Daniel, who was smirking like he'd made a clever joke instead of accusing me of sleeping my way to a promotion in front of our families. "Come on, we're all thinking it. You went from senior analyst to VP in 2 years. That doesn't happen unless someone's getting special treatment." He took a sip of his wine casually. "I'm guessing it was Robert since he's getting divorced and you had all those late meetings with him." My mother gasped. "Daniel, that's a horrible thing to say." He shrugged and looked around the table. "Is it though? Let's be realistic. She's not that talented. Average college, average grades, average performance reviews until suddenly she's shooting up the ladder. Do the math." My father-in-law James shifted uncomfortably. "Son, maybe this isn't the time." But Daniel was warming up. "No, this is the perfect time. Everyone's here. They should know what kind of woman she really is." He pulled out his phone. "I've been tracking her promotions and every single one happened after she spent significant alone time with male supervisors. First was Kevin in accounting. Remember him, honey? You worked on that audit together for 3 months, then boom, promotion." He showed a spreadsheet to the table. "Then Gregory in operations. Another 3-month project, another promotion. Now Robert, and look, she's a VP. The pattern is obvious." My sister Julia stood up. "You're disgusting. She earned those promotions." Daniel laughed. "Earned? She can barely use Excel properly. I have to help her with basic formulas. You think someone who needs help with spreadsheets becomes VP of strategic planning on merit?" He turned to his brother. "Corbin, remember when she asked us what EBITDA meant at that barbecue? This woman didn't know basic business terms, but somehow she's running a strategy." Corbin looked away, embarrassed. "That was 4 years ago, Daniel. People learn." Daniel snorted. "Not that much, not that fast, unless they're learning in hotel rooms." He pulled up another document on his phone. "Look at this. Every one of her business trips coincided with Robert's travel schedule. Miami in March, Denver in May, Chicago in July. They were always at the same conferences. You think that's a coincidence?" I tried to grab his phone, but he pulled it away. Those were required conferences for the leadership team. Everyone went. But Daniel was on a roll. "Everyone went, but you got promoted after. Funny how that works. What happened in Miami? You came back with that new watch you said was a company gift. Companies don't give Cartier watches, honey. Guilty executives do." My mother-in-law started crying. "Daniel, please stop this." He turned to her. "Mom, you deserve to know who your daughter-in-law really is. She's using her body to climb the corporate ladder while I'm working honestly at my dad's company making half what she makes. It's humiliating." His father interrupted. "You work 3 days a week and spend the rest golfing." Daniel's face went red. "That's different. I'm networking. She's doing something else entirely." He stood up and addressed the whole restaurant, which was now watching. "Everyone should know that my wife, who couldn't even get into business school on her first try, is now a VP at a Fortune 500 company. Does that make sense to anyone?" A woman at the next table spoke up. "Maybe she's just good at her job?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "Good at her job? She brought home a presentation last week with spelling errors. Spelling errors. And she's supposedly strategic planning for a billion-dollar company? Please. The only thing she's good at planning is which executive to target next." He turned back to me. "So which one was it? Robert? Or maybe all 3? Is that how you went from 60,000 to 200,000 in 5 years?" My sister pulled out her phone. "Actually, Daniel, I have something interesting here." She showed the screen to everyone. "This is from your company's website. It shows you as a junior sales associate, the same position you've had for 8 years. While your wife got promoted 4 times, you haven't moved up once." Daniel's face darkened. "That's because I don't compromise my integrity." Julia continued. "Really? Because I also have this email from your father to the CEO of his company." She read aloud. "Please find a position for my son, Daniel. He's been struggling to meet basic targets, but we can't fire him for obvious reasons." The table went silent. Daniel's father grabbed the phone. "Where did you get this?" Julia smiled. "Daniel has the lowest sales numbers in the company, but the highest salary for his position. Nepotism at its finest." She turned to me. "Meanwhile, my sister graduated summa cum laude from her MBA program, which she completed while working full-time. She published 3 papers on strategic market analysis that are still cited in academic journals. Her previous company tried to counter-offer with a 30% raise to keep her." Daniel's mother looked at him, shocked. "You said she barely graduated." Julia pulled up another document. "This email is from 8 years ago, right when Daniel started at the company. His father wrote to the CEO asking him to create a position for Daniel because he'd failed at 2 other sales jobs." Julia scrolled down on her phone, reading more details while everyone at the table leaned in to look. Daniel's first-year performance review shows he missed every single quarterly target. Second year, same thing. Third year, he actually lost 3 major accounts because he forgot to follow up with clients. She turned the phone toward Henrietta and James. Year 4, the regional manager recommended termination, but James overrode it. Year 5, another termination recommendation, blocked again. Years 6 and 7, Daniel was moved to smaller accounts where he couldn't do as much damage, but his sales numbers stayed at the bottom of the entire department. My mother-in-law's face crumpled as she looked at her husband. James, is this true? You told me Daniel was doing well at work. James kept staring at his plate, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I was trying to help him find his footing. He's my son. What father wouldn't help his son? Julia wasn't done yet. The email also mentions Daniel's salary. Want to know what he makes? She looked around the table. $95,000 a year. The average salary for junior sales associates at that company is $58,000. Daniel makes 40% more than his colleagues while producing 60% less in actual sales. Daniel lunged across the table trying to grab Julia's phone, his face turning a dark purple color that made the veins in his neck stand out. Give me that right now! Julia stepped back smoothly, holding the phone out of his reach while she kept reading. Oh, this is interesting. 3 separate times, the company tried to put Daniel on performance improvement plans, standard procedure when someone isn't meeting basic requirements. But each time, James personally intervened and had the plans canceled. She looked at Daniel with something close to pity. Your dad has been protecting you from getting fired for 8 years straight. You haven't earned a single thing at that company. Everything you have came from your father's name, not your work. Henrietta turned to James with tears streaming down her face. Tell me she's lying. Tell me our son earned his position. James finally looked up, his face gray and tired. I thought if I gave him enough time, he'd figure it out. He's smart. He just needed the right opportunity. His voice got quieter. But he never put in the effort. He'd show up late, leave early, spend half the day on his phone. I kept thinking next quarter would be different. Next year would be different. He looked at Daniel. I've been trying to help you succeed, but you haven't wanted to work for it. Daniel shoved his chair back so hard it fell over, the crash making people at nearby tables jump. This is garbage. You're all ganging up on me because you can't handle the truth about her. He pointed at me, his finger shaking. Julia obviously made all this up to make me look bad. She probably hacked into the company server or something. This is a conspiracy to protect my cheating wife. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Every single person watching our table. A woman 2 tables over had her phone up, clearly recording everything. A man near the bar whispered something to his date while staring at us. The waiter who'd been approaching with our food backed away slowly toward the kitchen. I could feel my face burning hot, but I couldn't look away from Daniel's twisted expression. None of this is about me, he shouted louder. This is about her sleeping with her bosses to get promoted. Julia's just trying to change the subject because she knows I'm right. A man in a suit at the bar called out. Dude, your sister just showed everyone the actual emails. That's not made up. Daniel whirled toward him. Mind your own business. This is a family matter. The restaurant manager appeared next to our table, a thin man with glasses who looked deeply uncomfortable. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing the other guests. He glanced around at the watching crowd. Perhaps you could take this discussion outside? Daniel ignored him completely. The emails prove nothing. My father was just being supportive. That's what good parents do. Unlike her parents, who probably pushed her into sleeping around to make up for her average abilities. My mother gasped and grabbed my father's arm. Julia held up her phone again. Actually, the emails prove everything. They show a pattern of special treatment, inflated salary, and protection from consequences. That's called nepotism, Daniel. It means you got everything handed to you while criticizing your wife for actually earning her success. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to steady them, but I finally found my voice. I never cheated on you. Not once. Not ever. My voice came out steadier than I expected, cutting through the noise. Every single promotion I earned came from years of hard work and proven results. I worked 60-hour weeks. I completed projects ahead of schedule. I brought in new clients and saved the company millions in efficiency improvements. Daniel laughed, but it sounded mean and sharp. Oh, please, spare me the humble brag. I kept going, my voice getting stronger. I led the market analysis project that identified 3 new revenue streams. I restructured the entire strategic planning process, which increased our forecasting accuracy by 32%. I personally negotiated the partnership deal with Meridian Corp that brought in $45 million in new business. The words poured out, all the accomplishments I'd downplayed for years to avoid making Daniel feel bad. I published research papers that are used in business school programs. I won the National Strategy Award 2 years ago. I was invited to speak at 4 industry conferences last year because people actually value my expertise. Julia pulled up my LinkedIn profile on her phone and turned it toward the table. Look at this. 3 published papers on strategic market analysis in peer-reviewed journals. Her MBA thesis won the Hutchins Award for Innovative Business Research. It's been cited in 73 other academic papers. She scrolled down. Here are recommendations from 5 different executives. Listen to what Robert wrote, since Daniel's so obsessed with him. She read from the screen. Working with this strategist transformed our entire approach to market forecasting. Her analytical skills are unmatched, and her ability to identify emerging trends saved our division from multiple costly mistakes. She's the most talented strategic planner I've worked with in my 20-year career. Corbin spoke up quietly from the end of the table, his voice sad. Daniel, sit down. You're making this worse. He looked at his father. I've known for years that Dad was covering for you at work. Everyone in the family knew except Mom. He turned to me. I'm sorry. I should have said something a long time ago. You didn't deserve any of this. Daniel's face went even darker. You too? My own brother's turning against me? But Corbin just shook his head. I'm not against you. I just think you need to hear the truth. You've been coasting on Dad's name while resenting your wife for actually working hard. That's not fair to anyone, especially not to her. Daniel refused to sit down. Instead, he turned to face the entire restaurant, spreading his arms wide. Everyone needs to know the truth. My wife is a cheating whore who slept her way to the top of a Fortune 500 company. His voice echoed through the space. She's a liar and a fraud, and everyone's being fooled by her fake credentials. The manager's face went red. Sir, I'm asking you to leave immediately. You cannot use that language in this establishment. Several diners started booing. A woman near the window stood up. Get out! Nobody wants to hear your garbage. Another man joined in. Your wife sounds amazing, and you sound like a loser. More people started booing, some standing up and pointing toward the exit. My father Ken rose slowly from his seat, and something about the way he moved made everyone go quiet again. He's not a tall man, but right then he seemed to fill the entire space around our table. Daniel, you will never speak to my daughter that way again. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority that I'd only heard a handful of times in my life. Not in public, not in private, not ever. Daniel actually took a step backward, his mouth opening and closing without sound. My father continued. I've watched you undermine her confidence for years. I've seen you diminish her accomplishments and make her feel small for being successful. I stayed quiet because she asked me to, because she loved you and wanted to make the marriage work. He moved closer to Daniel. But I will not stay quiet while you publicly humiliate her with baseless accusations. You owe her an apology, and you owe everyone at this table an apology. Daniel found his voice again. I don't owe anyone anything. She's the one who destroyed our marriage by sleeping around. The manager signaled to someone near the host stand. I'm calling the police if you don't leave right now. I grabbed my purse and pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor loud enough to make nearby diners turn. The weight of every stare in the restaurant pressed against my back, but I kept my chin up and my eyes forward. I refused to give Daniel the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart in front of everyone. My hands shook as I slung my purse over my shoulder, but I willed my legs to move steadily toward the exit. Julia appeared at my side instantly, her hand firm on my elbow, guiding me through the maze of tables while my parents scrambled to gather their coats. Behind us, I heard Daniel's voice rising again, something about how I was running away because I knew he was right, but the manager's sharp response cut him off. The cool night air hit my face as we pushed through the restaurant doors, and I kept walking, kept my spine straight, kept my breathing measured even though my chest felt like it was caving in. I made it all the way to the parking lot before my knees buckled. My mother caught me as I collapsed against the side of Julia's car, her arms wrapping around me while 10 years of holding everything together finally shattered. The sobs came in huge, gasping waves that I couldn't control, couldn't stop, couldn't hide anymore. My mother's coat smelled like her perfume, and I buried my face in it like I was 6 years old again. Julia stood guard a few feet away, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice crisp and professional as she explained to someone that she needed an emergency appointment for her sister tomorrow morning. First thing, it couldn't wait. My father paced near the parking lot entrance, watching the restaurant doors like he expected Daniel to come after us. His jaw was clenched, so tight I could see the muscle jumping even from where I sat crumpled on the ground. Every few seconds, another sob would tear through me, and my mother would hold tighter, rocking me slightly, whispering that it was okay, that I was safe now, that everything would be okay, even though we both knew nothing was okay. My father finally stopped pacing and crouched down next to me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. He asked where I was staying tonight because I clearly couldn't go home to Daniel, his voice careful like he was talking to someone in shock. The question cut through my crying because I realized I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd been so focused on just getting through the anniversary dinner, on announcing my promotion, on celebrating what should have been a happy milestone. The idea of going back to our house, to our bedroom, to the life I thought I had, made my stomach twist. I couldn't picture walking through that door knowing what Daniel really thought of me, knowing he'd spent years building this twisted narrative in his head while I worked late and traveled for conferences and earned every single promotion through actual merit. My mother's arms tightened around me as another wave of tears hit, and I heard myself make a sound that didn't seem human. Julia ended her call and knelt down in front of me, taking both my hands in hers. She insisted I stay at her apartment, and then she said something that made me look up through my tears. She'd been collecting evidence of Daniel's behavior for months, documentation of his increasingly bitter comments about my career, screenshots of his social media posts, records of things he'd said to family members. She'd suspected he might eventually do something like this based on the pattern she'd noticed. Her voice was steady and sure, and I realized my little sister had been protecting me this whole time, watching my back while I was too busy trying to save my marriage to see what was happening. She'd known before I did that Daniel wasn't just insecure, he was building toward something and she'd been preparing for it. The thought made me cry harder but also sparked something else, something that felt like relief mixed with rage. Julia squeezed my hands and told me we were going to fix this. We were going to document everything. We were going to make sure Daniel couldn't hurt me anymore. We drove to my house while Daniel was still at the restaurant, Julia's car silent except for my occasional hiccuping sobs. My parents followed in their car, my father's headlights steady in the rearview mirror like a promise that I wasn't alone. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it 3 hours ago to get ready for our anniversary dinner. The porch light was on, the garden looked neat, the mailbox still had our names on it like we were a normal, happy couple. I used my key to unlock the front door and stepped into the entryway feeling like a stranger in my own home. Everything looked different now, tainted by what I knew about Daniel's thoughts, his tracking, his accusations. I moved quickly through the living room toward our bedroom, Julia right behind me with an empty suitcase she'd grabbed from her trunk. My mother went to the kitchen to make tea like that would somehow fix this. My father stood in the hallway, his presence solid and protective. I grabbed clothes from my dresser without really looking at what I was taking, just shoving things into the suitcase. Underwear, bras, socks, jeans, work blouses, my favorite sweater. I moved to the bathroom and swept toiletries into a bag. My toothbrush, face wash, makeup, the expensive moisturizer I'd bought with my last bonus. Everything felt mechanical, like I was watching myself from outside my body. Julia worked alongside me, opening drawers, checking closets, asking if I wanted this or that. When I moved to Daniel's side of the bedroom to grab my phone charger from the nightstand, I noticed his laptop sitting open on his desk. The screen was still lit, showing a spreadsheet with dates and locations. My hands froze on the charger cord. I walked over to the desk and stared at Daniel's laptop, my breath catching as I recognized my work calendar recreated in obsessive detail. He had spreadsheets documenting every business trip I'd taken over the past 3 years, every late meeting, every conference I'd attended. The columns were labeled with headers like location, duration, male colleagues present, and promotion timeline. He'd color-coded everything, red for trips that happened within 3 months of a promotion, yellow for regular business travel, green for local late meetings. The entire screen was mostly red and yellow. I scrolled down and found more tabs, each one dedicated to a different executive I'd worked with. Kevin from accounting had his own spreadsheet tracking the audit project we'd done together 4 years ago. Gregory from operations had detailed notes about our collaboration on the supply chain initiative. Robert had the most extensive documentation, including screenshots of his LinkedIn profile, notes about his divorce filing date, and a list of every conference we'd both attended with hotel names and dates highlighted. Julia appeared at my shoulder and immediately pulled out her phone. She started photographing everything on the laptop screen, her movements quick and efficient like she'd done this before. She clicked through Daniel's browser history, and I watched her face harden as she found the websites he'd been visiting. Men's rights forums with threads about exposing unfaithful wives, discussion boards where users encouraged each other to gather evidence and confront their partners publicly, posts filled with paranoid theories about successful women and how they must be sleeping their way to the top because women couldn't possibly earn promotions on merit. Julia photographed it all, her jaw clenched, her eyes scanning each page with laser focus. She found Daniel's posts under a username I didn't recognize, asking for advice on how to expose his wife's affairs at a family dinner, asking what kind of evidence would be most convincing, asking if he should confront her privately first or go straight to public humiliation. The responses urged him to make it public, to embarrass her in front of everyone, to destroy her reputation the way she'd supposedly destroyed their marriage. My phone started buzzing in my pocket, the vibration insistent against my hip. I pulled it out and saw texts from Henrietta flooding the screen. "I'm so sorry about Daniel's behavior. Please give him another chance. He's under so much stress at work. He didn't mean what he said. He loves you. We can work this out as a family." The messages kept coming, each one making excuses, each one asking me to forgive him, each one pretending that what happened at the restaurant was just a misunderstanding instead of a calculated public attack. I stared at the screen feeling nothing but exhaustion. My mother-in-law had watched her son accuse me of being a whore in front of dozens of people, and her response was to ask me to give him another chance because he was stressed. The phone buzzed again with another message, and I turned it off completely, the screen going black in my hand. I finished packing with renewed focus, grabbing important documents from the file cabinet in our home office. My passport, birth certificate, social security card, bank statements, investment account information, copies of my employment contract and promotion letters. Julia reminded me to take anything with sentimental value because I might not want to come back here. I grabbed the photo album from my college graduation, the jewelry box my grandmother left me, the framed picture of my parents from their wedding. I left behind the wedding photos of Daniel and me, the vacation pictures from trips we'd taken, the anniversary gifts he'd given me over the years. Those belonged to a marriage that I now realized had been dying for a long time, killed slowly by his resentment and insecurity while I was too busy working to notice. We loaded everything into Julia's car, and I took one last look at the house before climbing into the passenger seat. My father squeezed my shoulder through the car window and promised he'd check on the house tomorrow, make sure Daniel didn't do anything stupid when he came home and found my things gone. At Julia's apartment, I collapsed onto her couch while she made coffee and pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. She sat down next to me and opened the folder, revealing months of evidence she'd been compiling. Emails from Daniel's coworkers at his father's company complaining about his lack of effort, about missed deadlines and lost clients. Performance reviews showing declining results year after year, with notes from managers recommending performance improvement plans that were never implemented because of James's interference. Records of client complaints Daniel had mishandled, including one major account that had threatened to leave because Daniel never returned their calls or followed up on their requests. Julia had screenshots of Daniel's social media posts from the past 2 years, a timeline of his increasingly bitter comments about successful women, about affirmative action, about how the corporate world was rigged against men. She'd documented every snide remark he'd made at family gatherings about my career, every time he'd diminished my accomplishments or suggested I'd gotten lucky instead of earned my success. The evidence was overwhelming and damning, and I realized my sister had been watching this train wreck unfold while trying to protect me, gathering ammunition for a fight she knew was coming even when I was still pretending everything was fine. I slept better at Julia's apartment than I had in months, maybe years. Sunday morning, she made coffee and we sat at her kitchen table planning the next steps. She'd already emailed the attorney to confirm my appointment for Monday at 9. I spent the day organizing documents, printing bank statements, pulling together tax returns from the past 5 years. Every piece of paper felt like armor I was building against whatever Daniel might try next. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Henrietta begging me to reconsider, from Daniel's number that I'd already blocked, from my mother checking if I needed anything. I turned the phone face down and focused on the spreadsheets Julia helped me create showing our joint assets, my individual retirement accounts, the investment portfolio I'd built from my bonuses. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. I dressed in my best suit, the navy one I wore for important presentations, and Julia drove me downtown to the law offices. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that charged by the minute. I sat in the waiting room flipping through a magazine without seeing any of the words until the receptionist called my name. The attorney's office was smaller than I expected, lined with law books and framed degrees. She stood up when I entered, a woman maybe 10 years older than me with short gray hair and sharp eyes behind black-rimmed glasses. She shook my hand firmly and gestured to the leather chair across from her desk. I sat down and placed my folder of documents on my lap, suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating. She opened a yellow legal pad and uncapped a pen. She asked me to start from the beginning, so I told her about the anniversary dinner, about Daniel's accusations in front of our families, about the spreadsheets he'd created tracking my work schedule. I showed her the photos Julia had taken of Daniel's laptop, the evidence of his forum posts, the pattern of obsessive monitoring. She took notes without interrupting, her expression neutral and professional. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against the pad. She explained that Daniel's public accusations could actually strengthen my position, especially with multiple witnesses who could testify he made false claims about my professional conduct. She asked if I wanted to pursue defamation charges alongside the divorce. The question hung in the air between us while I considered it. Part of me wanted to make Daniel pay for humiliating me, for trying to destroy my reputation with lies. But a bigger part just wanted to be free of him as quickly as possible. I shook my head and told her I just wanted a clean divorce, wanted to protect my career and move forward with my life. She nodded like she'd expected that answer and made another note on her pad. She asked about our financial situation and I handed over the folder I'd prepared. She flipped through the bank statements and investment records, pausing occasionally to ask questions about specific accounts or transactions. She warned me that Daniel might try to drain joint accounts out of spite, and I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't even thought of that possibility. She pulled out her phone and called her assistant, instructing them to prepare emergency paperwork to freeze our joint accounts until the divorce was finalized. She asked about my income compared to Daniel's, and I gave her the numbers. $200,000 versus his $90,000 from his father's company. She raised her eyebrows slightly but didn't comment. just wrote it down. She asked about our house, our cars, any major debts or loans. I answered each question while she filled pages of the legal pad with notes and figures. The weekend passed in a blur of paperwork and planning. Monday morning, I woke up at Julia's apartment with my stomach in knots. I got ready for work slowly, changing my outfit 3 times before settling on a simple black dress and blazer. Professional, but not trying too hard. I drove to the office dreading every minute, imagining whispers in the hallways, people staring at me in meetings. My assistant greeted me normally when I arrived, which felt like a small mercy. I'd barely set down my bag when she told me Dane wanted to see me right away. My heart sank. I walked to his office on the executive floor feeling like I might throw up, convinced Daniel's accusations had already poisoned my reputation. I knocked on his door and he called for me to enter. I stepped inside and he looked up from his computer with an expression I couldn't read. He gestured for me to sit and closed his laptop. He said Alexa from HR had contacted him over the weekend after hearing about the restaurant incident from a board member who'd been dining there. I felt my face go hot with embarrassment, but he held up a hand. He said the company wanted to offer me support and protect their investment in my career. The words took a moment to register. Support, not discipline or investigation. He explained that the executive team took reputation attacks seriously, especially false accusations about professional misconduct. He asked if I was okay and if there was anything I needed. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. He said Alexa wanted to meet with me that afternoon if I was available. I managed to say yes and he smiled, told me to take whatever time I needed to handle my personal situation. Alexa's office was on the 3rd floor, decorated with plants and family photos that made it feel less corporate than most HR spaces. She closed the door behind me and offered coffee, which I accepted just to have something to do with my hands. She sat across from me and explained that the company had strict policies against exactly what Daniel had accused me of, and they maintained detailed documentation of all promotion decisions specifically to defend against such claims. She asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint about his defamatory statements. I hesitated, still processing that my company was protecting me instead of investigating me. She explained they took these situations seriously because false accusations could damage both the employee and the company's reputation. I asked what filing a complaint would involve, and she outlined the process, the documentation they would need, the potential outcomes. I pulled out my phone and showed her the evidence I'd already gathered. My complete employment history, performance reviews dating back 5 years, project outcomes with measurable results, business case analyses I'd written that led to each promotion. She transferred the files to her computer and opened them one by one, nodding as she read. She pulled up my personnel file and showed me page after page of documentation. Every promotion decision had been reviewed by multiple executives, justified with specific performance metrics, approved by committees. My file was spotless. She pointed out notes from various managers praising my strategic thinking, my analytical skills, my leadership during complex projects. She showed me the scoring rubrics used to evaluate candidates for advancement, where I'd consistently ranked at the top. Every piece of evidence contradicted Daniel's narrative completely. I left work feeling lighter than I had since the anniversary dinner. Julia ordered pizza for dinner and we ate it straight from the box while watching mindless television. Around 8 o'clock, someone knocked on the apartment door. Julia looked through the peephole and her expression hardened. She told me it was Daniel. My heart started racing and I moved away from the door. He knocked again, louder this time, and called my name through the door. Julia called out that I wasn't interested in talking and he needed to leave. He raised his voice, saying he just wanted 5 minutes to explain. Julia pulled out her phone and told him she was calling the police if he didn't leave immediately. He started yelling that I'd turned his whole family against him, that his father was threatening to fire him because of the embarrassment I'd caused. Julia dialed and put the phone on speaker. The dispatcher answered and she gave the address, said her sister's estranged husband was harassing them and refusing to leave. Daniel must have heard because the knocking stopped. I heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, and then silence. Julia called the police and I heard Daniel's footsteps fade down the hallway. After the dispatcher confirmed officers were on their way, we waited in silence until they knocked 20 minutes later. 2 officers took our statement about the harassment and documented everything, including the threatening texts Daniel had been sending since the anniversary dinner. They said they'd file a report and warned that if he returned, we should call immediately. I barely slept that night, jumping at every small noise from the hallway. The next morning, I contacted Rachel and told her about Daniel showing up at Julia's apartment. She asked me to forward all the threatening messages and said we needed to start building a case for a restraining order if this behavior continued. She also mentioned the divorce papers would be ready by Friday and asked where we should serve them. I suggested his office since he worked at his father's company and there would be witnesses. Rachel agreed and said she'd arrange for a process server to deliver them during business hours when James would likely be present. My mother called around noon to check on me. She sounded worried and said Henrietta had been calling her repeatedly trying to arrange some kind of meeting between Daniel and me. My mother told her absolutely not, and that Daniel needed serious professional help for his paranoid behavior. She said Henrietta kept making excuses about stress and pressure, but my mother shut that down immediately. She told Henrietta that Daniel's public accusations were unforgivable, and that no amount of stress justified what he did at the restaurant. I thanked her for standing up for me, and we talked for almost an hour about next steps. She offered to help me find an apartment and said my father wanted to come over that weekend to make sure I had everything I needed. Over the next few days, I worked from Julia's apartment, setting up my laptop at her kitchen table and diving into a major strategy project for a potential company acquisition. My team scheduled video calls and never once mentioned the restaurant incident, though I knew they'd all heard about it by now. They were professional and supportive, focusing entirely on the work and treating me exactly the same as before. The project was complex and demanding, which actually helped because it gave me something to focus on besides the divorce. I spent 12-hour days analyzing market data, building financial models, and preparing presentations for the executive team. Dane sent me an encouraging email midweek saying my preliminary analysis was excellent and that the CEO was impressed with my initial findings. Friday afternoon, Rachel called to say the divorce papers had been served. The process server found Daniel at his office and handed him the documents while James was standing right there in the lobby. She said Daniel's face went white when he saw what they were, and that James took him into a private office immediately after. About 2 hours later, James called me directly. His voice was quiet, and he apologized for his son's behavior at the restaurant and everything that followed. He said he'd been enabling Daniel for too long and that the public accusations were inexcusable. He promised he wouldn't interfere with fair asset division, and said he'd already spoken to his own lawyer about staying neutral during the divorce proceedings. I thanked him for calling and told him I appreciated his honesty. He sighed and said he hoped Daniel would get help, but that he couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions anymore. Daniel's response came Monday morning in the form of a legal counterclaim that Rachel forwarded to me. His lawyer had filed allegations of adultery and was demanding I forfeit my share of marital assets as the guilty party in the marriage breakdown. The document listed all the same accusations Daniel had made at the restaurant, citing my business trips and late meetings as evidence of affairs with multiple executives. Rachel called me after I'd had time to read through it, and she was actually laughing. She said Daniel's lawyer was either completely incompetent or hadn't listened to a word Daniel told him, because accusations like this required actual proof. She explained that Daniel had zero evidence because nothing had happened, and that filing baseless adultery claims could actually backfire on him during settlement negotiations. I gathered everything Rachel requested for our response. My work phone records showing every call I'd made and received for the past 3 years. Complete company email logs that IT pulled for me showing all my correspondence with colleagues, including the executives Daniel accused me of sleeping with. Security badge data from our office building that tracked exactly when I entered and left work each day, proving I was never at hotels or secret meetings during the times Daniel claimed. Every single piece of documentation contradicted his timeline and his accusations. Rachel reviewed everything and said it was perfect, that we could prove my actual whereabouts for every instance Daniel cited in his counterclaim. She was already drafting a response that would demolish his adultery allegations with hard data. While dealing with the legal battle, Julia helped me apartment hunt during evenings and weekends. We looked at 6 different places before finding a beautiful 1-bedroom in a building with excellent security features. The apartment had a doorman, security cameras in all common areas, and required key card access to get past the lobby. The rent was higher than I'd planned, but I could afford it with my salary, and I needed the peace of mind. I signed the lease that same day and arranged to move in 2 weeks later. Julia came with me to buy basic furniture, and we spent a Saturday picking out a couch, bed frame, and kitchen table. It felt good to choose things that were completely mine, not shared with Daniel, or compromised to match his preferences. The following weekend, I went to the house I'd shared with Daniel to start packing my belongings. I brought Julia and my father with me for support, and in case Daniel tried anything. When we arrived, Daniel was standing in the driveway with his arms crossed. He said I wasn't taking anything because everything in the house belonged to him. My father told him to move aside, but Daniel blocked the front door. I pulled out my phone to call Rachel, and she conference called Daniel's lawyer right there on the spot. Within 15 minutes, she had a judge on the line who issued a temporary order allowing me to retrieve my personal property and half of all jointly purchased items. She emailed the order to Daniel's lawyer, who had to read it out loud to Daniel while we all stood there waiting. Daniel's face turned red, but he moved away from the door. We went inside, and I started in the bedroom, packing my clothes, jewelry, and personal items into boxes. Daniel followed me from room to room, making snide comments about how I was stealing from him. My father finally told him to either leave the house or shut up, and Daniel retreated to the garage. Julia helped me sort through the living room, and we divided furniture based on who had paid for what. I took the bookshelf I'd bought before we got married, the desk I used for work, and several pieces of art I'd inherited from my grandmother. Daniel came back inside when we started loading my father's truck and tried to grab a lamp I was carrying. My father stepped between us and told Daniel that if he touched me or my property again, he'd call the police. Daniel backed off but stood there glaring while we made 3 trips to load everything. By the time we finished, I felt exhausted, but relieved to have my things out of that house. My father arrived with a rental truck the next morning, and Corbin showed up right behind him. Daniel stood in the driveway with his arms crossed and a mean look on his face, but he didn't try to stop us this time. We worked quickly, loading boxes and furniture into the truck while Daniel watched from the garage doorway. Corbin carried the heavy stuff without being asked and kept shooting guilty looks at his brother. After we loaded the third box, Corbin pulled me aside near the truck. He looked embarrassed and kept his voice low so Daniel wouldn't hear. He said he should have said something years ago about how Daniel talked about me behind my back. He told me Daniel had always been jealous of anyone who did better than him, even back in high school when Corbin made varsity and Daniel didn't. He said he was glad I was getting out and that I deserved so much better than his brother ever gave me. I thanked him and we went back to loading boxes. By noon, the truck was full and my father drove it to my new apartment across town. The building had a doorman who helped us unload everything into the elevator. My apartment was on the 8th floor with big windows that let in tons of light. Julia met us there with cleaning supplies and helped me unpack the kitchen boxes first. We worked all afternoon setting up furniture and hanging curtains. By evening, the place started to feel like mine. I stood at the window looking out at the city lights and felt something lift off my chest. For the first time in years, I could breathe without worrying about Daniel's mood or whether my good news would make him angry. I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to make myself smaller so he wouldn't feel bad about himself. I'd stopped talking about work promotions at home and learned to downplay my achievements so he wouldn't sulk for days. I'd even turned down speaking opportunities because Daniel said it made him look bad when his wife was more successful than him. Now I had my own space where I could be proud of what I'd accomplished without apologizing for it. Monday morning, Dane sent me a message asking if I was free for lunch. We met at a restaurant near the office and he ordered us both the special without asking what I wanted, which normally would annoy me, but somehow felt comfortable with him. He told me the executive team wanted to offer me a new project, leading strategic planning for a major acquisition the company was considering. The target company had operations in 6 states, and the deal was worth over $300 million. He said my analysis work on the last 2 acquisitions had been outstanding, and everyone agreed I was the right person to lead this one. He looked me straight in the eye and said my work spoke for itself, and the executive team had complete confidence in my abilities. I felt tears start but blinked them back and thanked him. He said I should take the rest of the day to review the preliminary materials, and we'd kick off the full project team on Wednesday. Walking back to the office, I felt excited about work in a way I hadn't in months. I dove into the acquisition project with everything I had. The team included people from finance, operations, legal, and IT, all of them smart and eager to collaborate. We spent the first week mapping out the target company's structure and identifying potential risks. My colleagues asked good questions and built on each other's ideas instead of competing for credit. One woman from finance stayed late with me going through their balance sheets and we ordered pizza and worked until 9. She told me she'd heard about what happened at my anniversary dinner and said her ex-husband had been the same way about her career. We talked about how some men just couldn't handle their wives being successful and how much better life was without that constant resentment. I went home to my new apartment feeling energized instead of drained. The next morning, Rachel called with an update. She said Daniel's lawyer had contacted her recommending that Daniel drop the adultery claims. They had zero evidence because nothing had happened, and continuing with those accusations would only make Daniel look worse in court. Rachel was negotiating a straightforward asset division based on our prenuptial agreement. I'd completely forgotten about the prenup we signed before marriage. Daniel's father had insisted on it, and at the time I thought it was insulting, but now I was grateful. The agreement protected assets each of us brought into the marriage and earned individually during it. Since I out-earned Daniel by a lot, this worked heavily in my favor. My retirement accounts, investment portfolio, and the bonuses I'd saved were all mine. Daniel would keep his trust fund from his grandfather, and whatever he'd managed to save from his salary. Rachel said she was pushing for a quick settlement, and thought we could have everything finalized within 3 months. 2 weeks later, she called again. Daniel had agreed to mediation after his lawyer explained that going to trial would only expose his baseless accusations in public court records, and likely result in him paying my legal fees on top of his own. We scheduled the mediation for the following Tuesday at Rachel's office. The day arrived and I dressed in my best suit, the navy one I wore for board presentations. Daniel showed up in jeans and a wrinkled shirt looking like he hadn't slept in days. We sat on opposite sides of a long conference table with our lawyers between us. Daniel wouldn't look at me the entire time. His lawyer did most of the talking while Rachel laid out our proposed asset division. We went through everything methodically. Daniel would keep the house but assume the full mortgage payment. I would take my retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, and the car I'd bought with my bonus money. We'd split the joint savings account 50-50. Daniel's lawyer argued about the car, but Rachel pulled out the purchase receipt showing I'd paid for it entirely with funds from my individual account. After 4 hours, we had everything worked out. Daniel signed the papers without saying a word to me. His hand shook a little when he wrote his name, and for a second I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered him standing in that restaurant calling me names in front of everyone we knew, and the feeling passed. 3 months after the anniversary dinner that destroyed my marriage, the divorce was finalized. The judge signed the papers on a Thursday morning, and Rachel messaged me a photo of the final decree. I was in a project meeting when I got it and had to excuse myself to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt relief wash over me like cool water. I was free. Free to focus on my career without someone resenting every achievement. Free to be proud of my work without downplaying it. Free to build a life without Daniel's constant bitterness weighing me down. I went back to the meeting and jumped into the discussion about market projections with renewed energy. My career was mine again, and I was ready to see how far I could go. The acquisition project launched 3 months after the divorce was final. I stood in the main conference room watching my team present our findings to the board of directors. We'd spent 9 months analyzing market data, running financial models, and building relationships with the target company's leadership. The CEO sat at the head of the table taking notes while we walked through each slide. My hand stayed steady on the presentation remote even though this was the biggest project of my career. The target company was a tech firm with strong patents but weak market presence. Our analysis showed we could integrate their technology into our existing products and triple their revenue within 2 years. When we finished presenting, the CEO asked 3 pointed questions about integration costs. I answered each one with specific numbers from our detailed projections. The board voted to approve the acquisition right there in the room. The CEO shook my hand afterward and told me this was exactly the kind of strategic thinking the company needed. 2 weeks later, at the quarterly all-hands meeting, he called me up to the stage in front of 800 employees. He thanked me by name for leading the acquisition project and announced that the deal had already started generating new client interest. My bonus hit my bank account the next day. It was more money than Daniel made in a year at his father's company. Julia picked me up that Friday afternoon in her car packed with overnight bags. We drove north toward Napa Valley with the windows down and music playing. She'd booked us a weekend at a bed and breakfast surrounded by vineyards. We stopped at the first winery an hour before sunset and sat on their patio overlooking rows of grapevines. Julia raised her glass of Chardonnay and clinked it against mine. The divorce papers had been signed for 6 weeks now. I owned my own apartment, had my own bank accounts, and answered to nobody about my schedule or my success. Julia started laughing first. She reminded me how Daniel's accusations at that anniversary dinner had backfired so completely. His paranoid spreadsheets and tracked calendar became evidence of his obsessive behavior instead of proof of my wrongdoing. All his claims about my incompetence got documented and disproven by HR. His public meltdown got witnessed by dozens of people who could testify to his instability. I laughed too, realizing that Daniel's attempt to destroy my reputation had actually forced me to document my achievements more thoroughly than I ever would have otherwise. Every promotion now had a paper trail showing exactly why I earned it. Every project had measurable results proving my contributions. Every accusation had been investigated and cleared. Julia ordered another bottle of wine and we spent the evening talking about everything except Daniel. We made plans to visit Italy next spring. We talked about her dating life and her plans to apply for a promotion at her own company. The sunset turned the vineyard gold and then purple. For the first time in years, I felt completely relaxed. I started dating 2 months after the divorce was final. A friend from work introduced me to someone she knew from business school. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning and talked for 3 hours. He worked in venture capital and traveled constantly for his job. When I mentioned my recent promotion, he asked detailed questions about the acquisition strategy and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. We went to dinner the following week. He picked a restaurant I'd been wanting to try to didn't flinch when I ordered an expensive bottle of wine. Over the next few months, I went on dates with different men I met through friends and professional events. Some led to second dates and some didn't. The difference from dating Daniel was striking. These men had their own successful careers and their own ambitions. They didn't feel threatened when I talked about my work. They didn't make jokes about my intelligence or suggest I'd gotten ahead through anything except merit. One guy I dated for 6 weeks was a patent attorney who regularly worked 80-hour weeks. He understood demanding careers and never questioned why I had evening meetings or weekend work sessions. Another man I saw for a while ran his own consulting firm and actually asked for my advice on a market analysis project he was struggling with. Dating felt easy and fun instead of like walking through a minefield of Daniel's insecurities. My phone buzzed one Tuesday morning with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message said it was Henrietta and asked if we could talk. I stared at the screen for a full minute before responding. She called 5 minutes later. Her voice sounded tired and older than I remembered. She apologized for what happened at the anniversary dinner and for the months afterward when she'd tried to defend Daniel's behavior. She admitted that she and James had been enabling their son for years, always making excuses for his failures and blaming other people for his problems. They'd finally accepted that Daniel needed professional help. James had given Daniel an ultimatum at work. Either start attending therapy twice a week and show real improvement, or lose his position at the company. Daniel had chosen therapy after his father made it clear the decision was final. Henrietta said the therapist had helped them see how their constant protection had prevented Daniel from developing any resilience or self-awareness. She wasn't making excuses for what he'd done to me. She just wanted me to know that they were trying to help him become a better person, even if it was years too late. I thanked her for calling and told her I appreciated the apology. We agreed to meet for coffee the following week. The coffee shop Henrietta suggested was halfway between our neighborhoods. I arrived first and ordered a latte, then sat at a corner table watching the door. She walked in looking smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slightly hunched. We hugged briefly and awkwardly. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about neutral things like her garden and my new apartment. Then she brought up Daniel again. She didn't ask me to forgive him or to reconsider the divorce. She just wanted me to understand that she felt terrible about how things had ended. I told her the truth. I didn't hate her. She'd been caught in an impossible situation that night at the restaurant, watching her son publicly humiliate his wife. But I also couldn't pretend we'd ever be close again. She was Daniel's mother first, and always would be. That meant there would always be a barrier between us. We couldn't have the kind of relationship where we called each other for advice or met for lunch regularly. But we could be polite and respectful if we ran into each other. She nodded and said she understood. We finished our coffee and hugged again before leaving. It felt like closing a door gently instead of slamming it. 6 months passed after I moved out of the house I'd shared with Daniel. My career kept getting stronger. The acquisition I'd led was performing even better than projected, and I'd been assigned 2 more major projects. My apartment was decorated exactly how I wanted it, with modern furniture and artwork I'd chosen myself. I was seeing someone new, a software executive I'd met at an industry conference. He traveled as much as I did and understood the demands of a high-pressure career. When I told him about a difficult negotiation I was handling, he listened carefully and asked smart questions. When I succeeded at something, he celebrated with me instead of finding ways to diminish it. He thought my ambition was attractive instead of threatening. We'd been dating for 3 months, and it felt easy in a way my marriage never had. No walking on eggshells about my success. No downplaying my achievements to protect someone's ego. No constant low-level anxiety about whether my next promotion would trigger another crisis. I could just be myself completely. My life had become exactly what I'd worked for, without anyone trying to tear it down. The company called an executive meeting for a Monday morning in late September. I walked into the conference room expecting another quarterly review. Instead, the CEO announced a major restructuring that would create a new senior vice president role overseeing strategic planning across multiple divisions. He looked directly at me and said they wanted to offer me the position. The promotion came with expanded responsibilities, a significant raise, and a seat in the senior leadership meetings where company direction got decided. I accepted immediately. Later that day, I sent a group text to my parents and Julia sharing the news. My phone started ringing within seconds. My mother called first, crying happy tears. Julia sent a string of celebration emojis. My father left a voicemail saying how proud he was. That evening, I went to dinner with the software executive I'd been dating. He ordered champagne without me asking and toasted to my success. Nobody questioned how I'd earned it. Nobody suggested I'd compromised anything to get ahead. Nobody made me feel like I needed to apologize for being good at my job. Everyone around me just celebrated. The professional conference was in Chicago in early November. I was scheduled to speak on a panel about strategic market analysis. I arrived at the convention center early to review my notes and ran straight into Daniel in the main lobby. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled and hung loose on his frame like he'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his hair needed cutting. He stopped walking when he saw me. For a few seconds, we just stood there 3 feet apart while conference attendees streamed past us. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. I could see him forming words, probably an apology or an explanation. I gave him a brief nod, the kind you'd give any professional acquaintance, and walked past him toward the conference rooms. I didn't look back. There was nothing he could say that would matter now. That part of my life was finished. Julia called me 2 weeks later while I was working late at the office. She'd heard through Corbin that Daniel had been fired from James's company. Apparently, he'd shown up drunk to an important client meeting and made inappropriate comments to the client's wife. James had tried to help him for years, covering for missed deadlines and poor performance, sending him to therapy, giving him chance after chance to improve. But he finally had to prioritize the business over his son. The company couldn't afford to keep losing clients because of Daniel's behavior. Corbin said their father had actually cried when he made the decision to fire Daniel, but he'd had no choice. The business employed 40 people whose families depended on those jobs. Julia asked if I felt bad for Daniel. I thought about it for a minute. Part of me did feel sorry for him. He'd destroyed his marriage, his career, and his relationship with his family because he couldn't handle his own insecurity. But mostly, I just felt grateful. Grateful I'd gotten out when I did. Grateful I hadn't wasted more years trying to make him feel better about himself. Grateful I'd built a life where my success was celebrated instead of resented. Daniel's problems had never actually been about me. They'd always been about his refusal to work on himself, to face his own failures, to build something instead of tearing other people down. I'd spent 10 years trying to make myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Now I was done shrinking. I started dating someone I met through a professional networking event about 8 months after my divorce became final. His name was Nathan, and he worked as a financial consultant for a different Fortune 500 company. We met at a panel discussion about market trends and ended up talking for 2 hours after the event ended. He asked intelligent questions about my work and seemed genuinely interested in my strategic planning projects. When I mentioned my recent promotion to senior vice president, he congratulated me without any hint of jealousy or skepticism. Our first real date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant where we talked about our careers, our families, and what we wanted from life. He told me about building his consulting practice from the ground up and the satisfaction he got from helping companies solve complex financial problems. I shared my experience with the divorce and Daniel's accusations. Nathan listened carefully and said any man who felt threatened by his partner's success had serious insecurity issues that had nothing to do with the partner. We started seeing each other regularly after that. He had his own demanding career with frequent travel and long hours, but he never once complained when I worked late or had to fly out for business meetings. Instead, he'd text me good luck messages before important presentations and want to hear all about my projects when we got together. He celebrated my wins like they were his own and offered thoughtful advice when I faced challenges at work. We were equals in every possible way. Both ambitious, both driven, both respectful of each other's professional commitments. The difference between being with Nathan and being with Daniel was like night and day. With Daniel, I'd always felt like I needed to downplay my achievements to protect his ego. With Nathan, I could be completely myself without apology. About a year after the divorce finalized, I received an email from the organizers of a major industry conference asking if I'd be interested in speaking on a panel about women in leadership. They'd heard about my career trajectory and thought my perspective would be valuable for other women facing similar challenges in male-dominated industries. I agreed immediately. The conference was held at a huge convention center downtown with thousands of attendees from companies across the country. My panel was scheduled for the second day in one of the larger ballroom spaces. I sat with 3 other female executives as we discussed our experiences climbing corporate ladders, facing discrimination, and dealing with colleagues who questioned our qualifications. When it was my turn to speak, I decided to share the story about Daniel's public accusations at our anniversary dinner. I explained how my own husband had accused me of sleeping my way to the top in front of both our families and a restaurant full of strangers. I described the humiliation of having my professional accomplishments reduced to sexual favors, and the pain of realizing the person who should have been my biggest supporter was actually my harshest critic. Then I talked about how I'd fought back with evidence, documentation, and the truth. I shared how my sister had prepared proof of my actual achievements and exposed Daniel's nepotism and poor performance. I explained the divorce process and how I'd emerged stronger and more confident than ever before. The response was overwhelming. The audience gave me a standing ovation that lasted almost a minute. After the panel ended, women lined up to talk to me. Some were crying as they shared their own stories about partners who resented their success or undermined their confidence. One woman told me her husband had sabotaged a major presentation by hiding her notes the night before. Another described how her boyfriend constantly made jokes about her being the breadwinner until she finally left him. A younger woman in her 20s said her fiancé had just called off their wedding because she'd gotten promoted to manager, and he felt emasculated working for someone who reported to her department. I listened to each story and realized my experience wasn't unique at all. So many talented, accomplished women were dealing with insecure partners who saw their success as a threat instead of something to celebrate. I exchanged contact information with several of them and promised to stay in touch. The conference organizers asked if I'd be willing to speak at future events, and maybe even develop a workshop specifically focused on recognizing and addressing toxic relationship patterns that hold women back professionally. Now, sitting in my apartment on a quiet Sunday morning with Nathan making breakfast in the kitchen, I felt genuinely happy in ways I never experienced with Daniel. My career kept growing with new opportunities and challenges that excited me. My relationships were healthy and supportive with people who wanted me to succeed. I'd learned that my success was something to celebrate loudly, not apologize for quietly. Life had turned out better than I ever imagined it could be during those dark days right after the anniversary dinner when my marriage imploded so publicly.